There's two reasons why economic populist candidates are breaking through at this point. One reason is that we've had more than a dozen years of intense free trade policy in this country. We've implemented NAFTA, most favored nation trading status for China, and dozens of other lesser-known trade deals, all of which have removed barriers on the export of U.S. jobs to other countries. Now, again, the issue is not that jobs would go to another country. It is that the U.S. government has become an active promoter of that process, actually giving corporations money, loans, to help them do it. And so, that's come home to roost. The fact is that in communities across this country, especially in smaller cities, everybody knows somebody who lost a job as a result of globalization, as a result of a set of trade policies that really shifted not merely the economic framework of this country, but the values of this country, the notion that it ought to be part of the job of the people you send to Washington to try and make sure that there'll still be work back home. What stood out about Sherrod Brown's campaign for the U.S. Senate from Ohio in 2006 was his willingness to throw away the Democratic Party's traditional playbook.
You marched in Seattle with steelworkers from Ohio at the WTO ministerials back in 1999. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And there weren't many congressmen who went there in 1999 who recognized at that point that trade was going to evolve and that all these global trade deals were going to evolve into that kind of issue. What was it that made you go there then?
It was a time when the public simply wasn't paying enough attention to NAFTA, to PNTR with China, and you could already see into the mid and late 90s how many jobs were lost, how our communities were being devastated, how families.
And instead of talking vaguely about education, health care, and housing, issues that are important but that the party has failed for many years to develop a coherent strategy on, he went to the core of the concerns about working people.
That we needed to bring trade, we needed to shine a light on trade so that people really understood better that these trade agreements were a big part of the hurt going on in our communities.
So what we begin to see here is that we didn't just change members of parties or members of political factions. We switched from people who had accepted what was essentially a free trade consensus, going back to the days when Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich worked together to pass NAFTA, and got rid of them and replaced them with people who have recognized, some of them for a very long time, that the free trade agenda is not good for American workers, it's not good for foreign workers, it's not good for the environment, it's not good for human rights, and at a fundamental level, it's not good for democracy. At this point, it's fair to say that it would be impossible for George Bush to get a free trade agreement or policy through the House and Senate, as he did with CAFTA just before the 2006 election. That's a remarkable notion.
I think there is a real core of people in the Senate that want to put out model trade legislation, that maybe even are going to introduce fast-track legislation that will be a prototype on how we should negotiate trade agreements, that will have real enforceable labor, environmental, food safety standards, that really can change the rules and change the direction of the global economy.
This is essentially a huge victory, the election, for the forces who've said, corporate capital needs to be constrained.
Now on my lapel I wear a pin depicting a canary in a bird cage. 100 years ago, the mine workers took a canary down in the mines. If the canary died, the mine worker knew he had to get out of the mines quickly. In those days, they had no government strong enough, nor no unions strong enough to protect them. Today, because of what government's done, people live 3 decades longer than they lived 100 years ago if they were born 100 years ago. And this really symbolizes what activist government can do to help build a middle class, to help build a stronger country.
And this is what's very exciting. There are people who are willing to say we should take serious steps, reopen trade agreements, renegotiate deals with an eye toward creating a trade policy that is humane, and with an eye toward recognizing what was really the fundamental message that came out of Seattle, and that is another world is possible. We can create a world that is dramatically fairer, dramatically more just, and dramatically better for workers in the U.S. and abroad. I'm John Nichols for Video Nation.